And to start the evening now, I'd invite Ashish Dhawan to share his thoughts.
We're privileged to have Mr. Ajay Piramal and Ms. Rohini Nilikani as our two keynote speakers. Both of them have built foundations that have adopted a strategic and systemic approach to giving and creating impact at scale. The AIP BCG report, so I want to thank them for being here. The AIP BCG report that's being launched today is really a partnership between these two organizations. They surveyed 100 ultra-high net worth individuals to understand their motivations and barriers for giving, and how these philanthropists can be more strategic and systemic with their giving. It was an attempt to also differentiate between CSR and personal philanthropy, between charity and more strategic giving. And some of the insights will be shared with you later today. We have a second session that then dives into a report on systems change. So the Convergence Foundation and Impact Sherpas interviewed and studied 20 organizations, non-profits, that are working systemically, that are working closely with government to deliver population scale impact in a sustainable manner. And what we wanted to do is really look under the hood to see what are these organizations doing, how are they managing to achieve scale, how are they working with government. And the idea really is to share these learnings to get more philanthropists to see the opportunity to work on a more systemic basis. We believe that systemic change is the highest ROI in philanthropy. And so it's one of the things that we want to share as we discuss this report. And interestingly, about 90% of the high net worth individuals that were interviewed as part of the BCG AIP report actually said that they want their giving to evolve towards a more systemic approach. I hope the discussion today about philanthropic giving is a rich one, and we're able to uncover insights that are fresh and new, and they allow us to take the discussion on philanthropy forward so it can deliver maximum impact. With that, I'd like to turn it back to Aditi to continue with the proceedings.
Thank you, Ashish. We'd now like to invite Mr. Ajay Piramal, the chairman of the Piramal Group. The Piramal Foundation has done groundbreaking work across 25 states. They've partnered with Niti Aayog to improve outcomes across 25 aspirational districts in India. Mr. Piramal, we look forward to your thoughts on how to make philanthropy more impactful. Please join us.
Good evening. I'm really encouraged to see so many philanthropists in this room. So Ashish, I want to just congratulate you for getting such a, distinguished audience today. I was very happy when you said that the report which you did, Convergence on Systems Thinking, and that 90% of the people, the ultra-high net worth individuals, talk about systemic giving that will make a big impact with systems. So that's something which is also close to our heart. So I'm going to start with that. I thought I'll just share with you how, in our view, philanthropy has been evolving in our country. At the time of independence, government had limited investment, limited resources, and at that time, all the philanthropists would give money to build schools, hospitals, and other such basic infrastructure. In fact, we need to remember that in 1950, the longevity, the average age of an Indian was just 34 years. And literacy was just 18%. So this was the gift of the British to us. And therefore, at that time, with limited resources. I think that's what all philanthropists did. And frankly, when I look at the philanthropists then, if you look at the percentage of wealth that they put in philanthropy was much more than what many of us may be doing today. But this evolved, and later on, you saw that there were many NGOs that came up in the 1980s, 2000, where rights-based advocacy was started, and there was a much more focus on policy. The NGO that I am associated with for the last 20 plus years, Pratham, for instance, and many of you are members of Pratham and founders of Pratham, as I can see. The basic thing was, how do you get the right to education? So similarly, so many other rights, whether it was the right to education, whether it was the health, similarly livelihood, all this was the focus during 2000. After that, as funds started increasing with the government, and government realized that they have to do much more, is when we found that there was scheme-based delivery, which is like, you know, the Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan, and so many, the National Rural Health Mission, and so many other missions, and the Jal Jeevan Mission, and so on. So what is the role now going forward is what I thought we should discuss today. It is, you know, the government in the last 7 years has spent 48 lakh crores in terms of philanthropy, or in terms of the social sector, what we call philanthropy or social sector. Over the last 7 years, the state and the center put together have spent 48 lakh crores, or 15% of GDP. But where are we on that? In spite of this, if we look at it, the SDG, the Sustainable Development Goal target, which is by 2030, we wanted a gross enrollment ratio in higher education should be 50, we are only at 26. Similarly, the maternal mortality being 70, we are 113. Similarly, safe drinking water, and so on. So in every area, as per as the SDG, in spite of spending so much, we are still far behind. But there is not only this, there's another tale which I want to bring out, which is, it's a tale of two stories that runs in India. If you look at the eastern part of India, which is where about 200 million people live, look at the numbers there. Poverty, which is the SDG target of 0%, the top 75% of India, which is basically, if you see the gray on this map, the west, the south, is almost near what SDG goals are, and I'm sure that we will achieve this in 2030. But what we find is that the other states, where the red is still 41%. So the difference in every area is significantly worse off in these states. And we have to look at this. As India becomes one of the, let's say, the third largest economy by 2029, we're well on our way, this disparity will only increase. And you can't have that. That is actually time bomb clicking, which all of us must be aware of. Also, another thing worth noting is that if the government is spending 46 lakh crores, and all the philanthropists in the world put together cannot spend that much. And therefore, it is necessary for us to see how we can get more out of what government does. And that is why I believe that we need to apply a systems thinking lens. And what do we mean by systems? Trying to make it a little bit, if you look at this, at the inner circle, is that we need to involve the community in whatever we do. And that is whether it is, I'm going to go fast, but let me just say, convergence with all the different ministries. Even for a child, a girl child, to get a scholarship, if she's of a minority, in any district, you would need about 10 different ministries to work together. That's why you find that though the government is supposed to spend, you saw that 46 lakh crores over 7 years, the budget actually of the government is twice that. And they don't spend it because a lot of money which is there for the social sector goes unspent. If it was there with this convergence and collaboration, and involving the community is important. And therefore we believe that we have to give power further to the panchayats and go down. That's where communities get involved in. The second thing is information systems. Rohini is here, you know the power of information systems. We've all seen this happening. And India today has some of the best data and information systems. How do we make it more digital to the last mile? And hence improve governance. Use this data to improve governance. The third thing we believe is talent. As you know, in government, and especially at the middle level of government, the talent remains what it is. There has no upward movement. I mean, we work with many schools, and many of you all do. If you work in public schools, a teacher will become a headmaster just by seniority. So by the time the headmaster may be 50, 55, then they'll go into some district role, which will be at 58, and they'll have a couple of years, and then they'll retire. How can you have a leadership of 2 years without any training? So whether it's organization development, whether it's leadership development, and the fourth area, I think, is on diversity, equity, inclusion. We work in several tribal areas, and there we just don't, they just feel they're out of this country. They are not part of the country. So whether it's their knowledge systems, whether there's adequate representation. So I think together, if we work together on systems, it is possible to do a change. And I want to just share with you a little bit of what has been our experience in working here. Another really important thing I found is many of us feel that actually government is very difficult to work with. There's a lot of corruption, but I don't think that's the case. I think 98, 99% of people in government at different levels want to work and want to make a difference. And not only that, the funds that you give, or if you work with government, you can lever your funds much more than what anywhere else. I'll give you the example of a command and control center which we set up in Bihar. In there, the amount of money our foundation put, 10 times that amount the state has put. So literally, they have a command and control center where there is IoT devices which have been put on every critical equipment in government hospitals, where there is a lot of digitization done. All the data of every hospital is available at the center in Patna, which can be seen from the Chief Minister downwards. I think we had, over a period of time, put about 30 crores in it. The government has already spent 300 crores. And seeing this now, even the Uttar Pradesh government has put in without us putting a single rupee. So you can see the leverage that's happening. Similarly, in leadership systems, we've seen this at least 10 times. You can get multiple of whatever money you put in. across the board, we can see that significant leverage is possible if we work side by side with government. I know I'm conscious of time, so I'm just going to give you a few examples. We've been working in Rajasthan with the state schools, public schools, for the last 16 years. We started with an experiment in Jhunjhunu, and I just want to give you the results. Everybody thinks that Rajasthan was a Bimaru state, but in the National Achievement Survey, the NAS survey of 2018, Rajasthan ranked second. That's because we've been working with the schools, the public schools, with headmasters. So this was done by government schools, in government schools. Asar, which I think Rukmini, where is she? She's here or not? I saw her name. Anyway, we've seen that Asar also shows a decline in private school enrollment. This is a very, very important thing, because for an average person, a school going to a private school means a cost of at least 15,000 rupees a year. And it's not that the learning levels in schools, in private schools are better, but people all have this impression that private school mein jana hai, not in government schools. We've been able to reverse the trend. We've been able to reverse the trend for the Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao program as well. In fact, Prime Minister quoted it as an example of the most improved district in Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao. And therefore, in every index today, Rajasthan has improved significantly and is amongst the top few states in the country. And this is all because of working with government, and our foundation has been doing it. I'll give you the other example of Bihar. We had a group of people recently, doctors from Mumbai, from the KEM hospital, which is supposed to be the best hospital for teaching in Mumbai and probably in India. And they went to Bihar, and after seeing the work in Bihar, they realized that the status of hospitals in Bihar today was better than what it was in Maharashtra and Bombay. And again, every indicator which has been measured independently, we have found significant change. Again, in the same public hospital with the same people, but if you work with systems, as I said earlier, this change is possible. This change is possible in our own lifetime in a few years. And again, the leverage of your money is significant. In the beginning, we spoke about aspirational districts. Aspirational districts, the Prime Minister identified in 2017. These are the least developed districts of the country. In fact, if you take aspirational districts plus the tribal districts in India, if that was a separate country, I'm sorry to say that out of 140 countries, we would be in the 130, 135 in terms of worst indices for development. This is how behind we are in these districts. 16% of our population lives in these aspirational districts. Only 1.5% of the CSR goes there. The amount of money which is, or the amount of, let's say, philanthropic money that goes into Pune district is actually almost equal to that of these districts put together. So stark is the difference. This is where we worked with Niti Aayog. First, as the introduction, you said we worked in 25 districts, but since then, now we're working in all the 112 districts. And again, working with government within the system, we've seen that with a systems approach, when there was a study which was done by an affiliate of Harvard Business School, 4 of the top 10 districts where we the districts where we partnered were amongst the top 4 of the 10 districts in education, in health, 3 out of the top 10. So change is possible if we believe that if we work together in a systemic manner. So the only thing I want to say is that if we work together, government is not corrupt as everybody thinks so. They are not lazy. They also want to make a difference. They want to get re-elected. So if you work with government, with the officials, in partnership, I think it is possible to make a new India. And as India gets into the 3rd largest economy, I think we can get more equitable growth if we look at it in a systemic manner and all of us come together to work. The task is big, but remember that the government has much more money than all of us, and if we can leverage it. With that, I just want to thank you for so patiently listening to me.
Thank you so much, Mr. Piramal, for sharing those very important statistics and the path to equitable growth in India. We are very honored to have with us today one of our core founders, Ms. Rohini Nilekani. As most of you know, Rohini is a strong advocate of supporting innovative solutions and groundbreaking work, taking risks to support these new solutions on a trust-based and collaborative approach. Rohini, we are all ears to hear your thoughts on the way forward for personal philanthropy.
सगळ्या मुंबईकरांना माझा नमस्कार. How are you all? It's wonderful to be in my native city in the monsoon with the sea looking so beautiful, and yet we are not flooded out. What better can you hope for in this beautiful city of Mumbai? It's wonderful to see this room, as Ajay said, of people who have understood the true meaning of using their wealth for societal purpose. And thank you, Ashish, thank you for the whole team for putting together this report. I have read it. It adds substantively to the discourse on Indian philanthropy. Congratulations, and we look forward to much more, because there's going to be lots more to uncover about the journey of the philanthropists of India. So I thought most of you are very well versed in what is happening in philanthropy. Many of you are doing most amazing, innovative work as your journeys in philanthropy move along, and it is a journey. It's like climbing a steep ladder. It's 32 years now since I started working in this space, and every day I learn something new and aspire to do something more. So in this journey, all of you know, you've read many reports, you've done a lot of research in your own philanthropy. So I said, what is the one thing we all don't talk too much about that I should broach? And I thought that some of you know that I keep talking ad nauseum about Samaj, Sarkar and Bazaar. But I realized that in this journey of philanthropy, Ajay spoke about how we as philanthropists can work together with Sarkar to do systems change. And he described a lot of the leveraged work that they are doing with Sarkar. But I realized that many of us have not talked enough about the role of Bazaar. Without Sarkar, Samaj and Bazaar working together, there is simply no way we can solve the many, many societal complex issues that face India today. As we grow economically, we also want to have our society develop so that everybody in India, all 1.4 billion of them who are standing outside these hallowed rooms, have a chance to sit at this table along with us. Isn't that the final goal? That all of society should have the same opportunities at least. In that journey, civil society organizations and philanthropies have learned in the last 20, 30, 40 years especially to work with Sarkar. And indeed, there are thousands, if not millions of champions within government who are working together with civil society, Samaj institutions and philanthropic foundations to help achieve scale in poverty reduction and increased all sorts of societal goods. However, we have not learned how to work with a very key component which all of you, most of you in the room represent, which is the bazaar. Now, why is that? I think it is because we have not, civil society has not managed to make bazaar enough of an ally in this journey. I must say that many of you will agree that many of the societal issues that are created are many of them, not all of them, but many of them are actually negative externalities of the bazaar. Whether it is societal issues of labor, livelihoods, or it is environmental issues, many of them stem from inside the fences of bazaar. And again, I'm not trying to bring anybody from bazaar down. I'm a very happy shareholder of the bazaar. I think the results of Infosys came out today. Vallabhai, I haven't seen them. I hope they were good. But, so I'm not at all anti-bazaar. I'm saying, how can we all together learn how to tap the bazaar as a more of an ally? And I think there are many synergies possible that in this journey of wealth with purpose that we can unlock. I'm going to give you 2 examples from my experience. So tomorrow, in fact, I'm going to co-host together with Rain Matter Foundation, is somebody here from there, and the sort of a event, Climate Leaders Meet. Some of you will be there. Together with the India Climate Collaborative. And we all are very acutely aware of what's going to happen with climate change, especially in this extremely critical decade of human development. And this India Climate Collaborative was set up together with the Tata Trust, the MacArthur Foundation, Edelgive, and us. And this collaborative hoped to build India's climate ecosystem and harness the climate philanthropy's potential, working with government, business, civil society, etc. This is a classic example of how we can pull in bazaar from both inside and outside. 2 to 2.3 times is the growth of fund flows towards climate action just in 6 years between 2017 and 23. Earlier, climate action represented about 1 to 2% of overall philanthropic funding, but it is increasing very rapidly because of this kind of collaboration between civil society organization and bazaar organizations, and I believe that we need much more such collaboration where, while Sarkar, of course, is going to be the dominant player when it comes to funds because they have the most money, I do believe that we can unlock much more when we use bazaar as an ally. Today, bazaar knows very well how climate change can affect everything in its supply chains, right? More and more and more people come and say, how can we be much more sustainable end to end? And I think here is where there's a very close possible relationship between civil society organizations working at the first mile to limit the impact of environmental destruction, working together with the best intentions of bazaar to certainly reduce the damage that is coming our way and to create a future very different from the future that we fear. A growing body of research has demonstrated how greater respect for CSOs and civic freedoms increases actually the bazaar's potential, financial investment, facilitating economic reform, reducing social unrest, and allowing both ideas and resources to spread at unprecedented rates. There was a 2018 paper called A Business Case for Civil Society, which shows that civil society can, actually the work of civil society organizations can reduce the cost of corruption, can help businesses be sustainable, can enhance investor and employee and customer relationships. Remember, civil society organizations also help to maintain societal harmony. And business houses know very well that in the absence of societal peace, it is really very hard to conduct business. So there are many synergies between the civil society sector and the bazaar sector, which I think remain underutilized, and I think we should start thinking together, how do we create better synergies between these two sectors? I would give one example of an organization called Agami, which we fund through the Access to Justice portfolio. It is dedicated to accelerating innovation in law and justice in India. Some of you might know of their excellent work. Since 2018, they have also played a critical role in developing the online dispute resolution field in India. I'm sure you all know that ODR is a public-facing digital space in which parties can convene to resolve their disputes. Agami has been nurturing early-stage startups, bazaar sector startups, in which they can build a compelling narrative around the potential of ODR to unlock support from key stakeholders in government, in the judiciary, and in the private sector. The partners, by the way, include Niti Aayog, the judiciary, ICICI Bank, and many, many startups. ODR is not far removed from our lives as we think. Dispute resolution costs borne by citizens and business have resulted in an aggregate loss of USD 56 billion to the Indian economy, and that means it comes close to 1.88% of GDP, not at all a small number. And if we can improve online dispute resolution, can you imagine what ripple effects come down into society? So there are such innovative possibilities where you bring Samaj, Sarkar, of course Sarkar is there, but Bazaar together to solve some of our problems. And I have become very interested and would be very happy to hear from people in the room as to how we can bring Bazaar into a much, much closer relationship with both Sarkar and Samaj. I urge philanthropists and business leaders to think more about this. I think in the report I was very struck. 100 HNIs were interviewed and more possibly, and you'll be hearing much more, so I won't waste time on telling you more about the report. But what was interesting to me is the forms of giving were as diverse as Indian society itself. And it is our diversity, I do believe, which allows us to experiment and innovate and successful models to be adopted. So there's much more work to be done, but it seems the most heartening thing in the report, as you will hear, is that most wealthy people want to give more, faster, and better. So can you imagine the opportunity? As India grows wealthy, unfortunately, it is likely that a small portion of India is going to grow wealthier faster than everybody else. We cannot keep staying so far away from what it was so beautifully described just now about the districts, for example, and the people, for example, that are left behind. We have to pull up other people along with us. That is the purpose of wealth creation in society. No society will allow runaway wealth creation unless it is seen as a societal good. No nation will allow only a handful of people to grow wealthy and use wealth only for themselves without bringing in all forms of restraint. So I won't belabor that point too much because I'm already in a room of the converted. I don't need to urge you to do, but there is always scope to do more. We struggle to do more. Nandan and I struggle. How can we give back more? We have signed the giving pledge. We have a long way to go to finish it, hopefully in our lifetimes. So always looking for more and more opportunities to collaborate at a systems level to create exponential change. For that, we have set up the Center for Exponential Change very recently, and we hope to be able to take at least 10 societal entrepreneurs to significant scale in the next 3 to 5 years in 3 to 5 countries. But that kind of imagination is needed to be unleashed throughout the chain. Even if you're beginning at the first step of philanthropy, I urge all of us, successful entrepreneurs, all of you, to start thinking scale at the get-go. I'm not suggesting you launch millions of crores worth of ventures, but if you start to imagine, even if you're supporting one child's scholarship, think, because you have the smarts, you have the wherewithal, you have the education, you have the networks, and you have the intent. How can you put all of that to think, what will it mean to take your passion to scale? Your organization need not scale, but your mission can scale in collaboration with 100 other entrepreneurs like yourselves. So we have started looking at how do you scale? And we've come up with a framework, not the framework. And some of the elements of that to think about is, How do you design for scale from the get-go? Because pilots succeed and scale often fails. So knowing what works at scale rather than scaling what works. How do you put technology to work for you? Not be led by technology, but be enabled by technology. How do you distribute the ability to solve? How do you create a system which is unified in its vision, but not uniform in its processes? How do you, therefore, leverage the wonderful diversity of India to solve in context? How do you unleash, how do you distribute the ability to solve? This is the kind of a few things I've told you about a process by which we can really scale every good idea that exists in this room. Without belaboring too much, because we're already a little behind schedule, I'm going to leave you with one thought. I love being in nature. I love everything from tigers to ants and the beautiful diversity. This is one country in India. Never forget that as you step out, even into the city of Mumbai. India is the one culture, the one country in the world where despite so much population pressure on our land, we have nurtured flora and fauna diversity, almost unparalleled in the world with this kind of land pressure. And that comes from a deep culture of respect, a deep culture of understanding that nature cannot be separated from human beings. And for me, that is one of the most inspiring things in my life and work. I always look to nature for inspiration every day. One of the things I'm fascinated with is spiders. And spiders have been around for 100 million years, much more longer than us. There are dozens of species that do miraculous things to build their webs and catch their food. And I always used to wonder, how is it that a tiny little spider manages to make a web from here to there with empty space in between? How does the spider cross from here to there with his web? And then I read up about it and found that yes, the spider is capable of spinning different kinds of yarn with different stickiness and strength. He's all ready with the web to be spun. But you know what he has to wait for to go to create a web from here to that wall, for example, while all of us are sleeping at night? He has to wait and wait and wait for a gentle breeze to come along, which allows him to throw the first thread across that yawning gap of space. And I always said, my God, that's so fascinating. We didn't realize the role of the gentle breeze in the making of the World Wide Web. And I think, I leave you with that thought, ladies and gentlemen, maybe philanthropy is the gentle web which allows the spiders of Samaj, Sarkar, and Bazaar to spin their beautiful, intricate webs for societal development all over the world. Let's be the gentle breeze and use our wealth with much more purpose. Dhanyavad, namaste.
Thank you, Rohini. That was extremely insightful. Thank you so much for your time and sharing your thoughts and stressing on the need for scale. Appreciate it. It's been a privilege for us to collaborate with BCG for the study that provides a comprehensive analysis of the philanthropic landscape in India, highlighting the motivations, challenges, and strategies that UHNIs across various stages of their giving are following. I'd now like to invite Abhik Singhi, Managing Director and Senior Partner at BCG, to share his thoughts.
Good evening, everyone. I have to start with a couple of disclaimers. It's a tough act to follow after what Ajay and Rohini have talked about. I was reminded by a few people here. Arun mentioned, he said, Abhik, why are you here? You are not a UHNI. So, what are you going to speak about? Ravi said, Abhik, you don't work in the social impact sector, so I'm branded as a person who doesn't work in the social impact sector, so why are you here? And then Vallabhbhai asked the most difficult question. He said, what is it that is there in the report? Can you tell me in 2 sentences? I did not prepare well enough, so I can't tell it in 2 sentences, but I'll try to tell it in the next few minutes. I saw a video a few months back where Jeff Bezos talks about the fact that when data and stories collide, it's actually the stories that win. So I'm trying to illustrate some of the things that we found in the report through a few stories, some which involve me, some which I have seen from a distance. So the first thing, and Abhishek and Amitabh from AIP will talk about it a bit later, we talked to 100 philanthropists, 100 UHNIs from India who have been pioneers and who have done a lot in the space. We looked at how they were similar, how they were different. But there was one question which came to my mind, which is, why do people give? And one of the things I was struck by, some of you may have been in Mumbai on 26th July 2005. And that was the time that Mumbai had the monsoons, and that was the day of 944 millimeters of rain, and there was, Rohini, not only monsoon, but there was chaos. Around the same time period, there was floods in New Orleans, but the reaction of what happened in India, in Mumbai, was very different than what happened in New Orleans. So a few of the people that we talked to actually talked about the fact that philanthropy, charity, different words people used, is actually a part of Indian tradition, culture. When you have floods, downpour, you actually have people coming out on the streets to help rather than to loot. And that's one thing to think about, that this is, of course, we should see what other foundations in different parts of the world are giving, but I think sometimes the learnings come also from introspecting what is a part of our culture itself. As any good consultant, I think one of the questions was what and how. And without stealing the full thunder from what the report says, and it's there on your desk, we found that there are different ways in which people contribute. We've classified it in terms of treasure, which is money, talent, which could be in terms of time, capabilities, anything else, and it is ties, it's network, right? And it's the 5 T's, and we talk about how those have been leveraged by philanthropists, by individuals to create significant impact in the context of India. And I remember a call which I received in March 2020. This was from a person who was in the healthcare, health tech industry. And he said, we want to do something because we are sure, we are clear that COVID is going to create, tremendous disruption. We believe that there is a need to create a digital product which actually would be given to the government to do telehealth, etc., etc. And he said, there is a set of traditional competitors who actually want to come together and build it. And that was the interesting thing. He said, but we are competitors. We can't trust each other. And can you, as an individual, as BCG, help stitch together this unnatural coalition, which actually had a set of healthcare providers, hospitals, a set of health tech players, a set of technology players, government, and honestly act as the equivalent of the core team. And this was unusual because, this kind of a model had not been done before. But I think that was the crisis which led for that to happen. And over a period of time, from just developing a product, actually it has become developed into an organization which is trying to create long-term change in terms of the digital public health in India, called Swasth. Now, why am I talking about it? Because one of the questions which keeps on coming is, how do you think about the role of philanthropy? And one of the things that I have come to the conclusion too is think of part of philanthropy as risk capital. there is a lot of things that venture capitals do in terms of investing ideas which may seem a bit audacious, but actually, if banks are not going to fund those crazy ideas, you need somebody to fund it. And therefore, think about philanthropic giving in that context. The other linkage is actually create ecosystems and networks, and I will not belabor the point which was made by Ajay and Rohini in terms of systemic change. The third piece, which I think is important, is who gives, when, and why do they not give? And, just from a personal experience, March 1, 1998 was when I joined BCG. When I received the offer to join BCG, I was very excited. I called up my father, who was a professor of sociology, and I called him from a PCO in those times, and I excitedly told him that, I'll be joining BCG, and he was, of course, very happy because I seemed very happy. But he had no clue what BCG did. So when I went home, he said, so, how much money will you be getting? And I told him about the money that I will be getting, and, that was slightly more than the money that he was getting of being a professor for more than 30 years. And of course, he was happy for me, but he was also concerned. And he called up a friend of his who was the Director General of Police in Rajasthan, and he said, can you do a check on this company and, figure out what they do? I hope that what they do is all legal, kind of a thing. And then he left me with a question which I think is a question which has stuck with me, which is, when is the right time to start giving? And he said, it's your money, you should decide. But, for a 25-year-old, it seems a lot of money. So the last thing, and I was discussing it with my 20-year-old son, and he gave me an advice for people to give more and to give earlier, which is one of the things that we found. He said, when people meet, they talk about different things. They talk about where they went to vacation. They talk about where they went to have lunch or dinner. And in recent times, politics or something else. He said, how can you make philanthropy? Where do you contribute? How do you contribute as the start of a conversation? How do you make giving cool? How do you make giving inspiring? And start that conversation. And I think, one of the things that we had in our report was 6 different segments. And we had one segment who actually contributes disproportionately with time, talent, ties. And we have, I see here, multiple people who actually do that. So thank you for inspiring us and making giving cool. Thank you.
We now move to the highlight of the evening, the launch of Wealth with Purpose, a report on Indian philanthropy. May I request all our core founders and our eminent guests in the front row to please come up in front, face the audience, and unveil the report. I'd also request all our other guests in the room, the reports have been shared on your tables. Please put up the report and help us just launch and unveil this report. Inviting our co-founders who are not in the front row, Vishal and Neeta Tulsian, Archana Chandra, please join them up front here. Archana. I now invite Amitabh Jaipuria, CEO at AIP, and Abhishek Gopalka, Managing Director and Partner at BCG, to present the findings of the report.
Thanks, Aditi. I have the insane privilege of leading AIP, and the fact that all of you are here to talk about philanthropy seems like such a huge validation of what AIP is intending to do and what our task is. So thank you very, very much for being here today. As we were rolling up to the event, the Finance Ministry heard about all the people who are going to be here. And they called us and asked us for a slot to discuss pre-budget proposals, so because of the financial heft in the room. So we, of course, told them that we have weightier matters to talk about. So we denied them the slot. So, but yeah, thank you very much for being here. I'll just take half a minute to really talk about AIP and what we do, and we'll quickly get into the report then. I'm aware of the fact that I'm following Ashish and Mr. Piramal and Rohini and Abhik, so therefore I won't take too long. AIP was established about 2 years ago with the aim to promote and catalyze personal giving in India. The insight really was very simple, that wealth creation has gone really far ahead, giving has not kept pace. So therefore, how can we promote and catalyze personal giving in India was really the core. Our vision is very simple. We aim to see personal philanthropy aid India's transformation. All our speakers who went before me talked about the fact that philanthropic capital can make a huge difference. And that really is the purpose of what we are trying to do, aid India's transformation. We figured out about how to do that, because that's a huge thing to try and do. So the mission statement that we came up with was to really say that, look, let's talk about creating a vibrant network of philanthropists and create a movement of and by philanthropists. So AIP is owned by all of you in the room. AIP is not owned by any of us who actually run AIP, but it's really owned by all of you. And if it's not owned by all of you, then AIP will just not succeed. So AIP is a network. It's a network of philanthropists by philanthropists, and it's meant to inform, influence, inspire each other. One of the key insights early on was the fact that philanthropists, all of you, all the people in this room today, are best at inspiring each other. Anybody else stands on the pulpit and talks about it is not going to move the needle at all. So thank you very much for being who you are and for the philanthropic activity that you really do. AIP couldn't have started and wouldn't have reached where it has had it not been for the support of its 4 core founders. And it started with an idea that Ashish had, but it was very quickly joined by Rohini. It was very, very quickly then joined by Amit and by Vishal Tulsian of Motilal Oswal Private Equity. And we are absolutely stoked to have all 4 in the room today. So thank you very, very much for your idea and for your vision, and which is what we are trying to implement. AIP was also then joined by 31 other founders who support AIP and who believe in the mission that AIP has. Many of you are in the room today here. Thank you very much for being here and for your support and guidance. So that's really what AIP is. We'll speak more in detail, probably one-on-one. We'll seek some time from you. About 7-8 months ago, AIP and BCG came together to do this report that Abhik talked about, and all our previous speakers also referred to. Rohini talked about it so well. Ashish talked about it. So in this report, we have basically spoken to 100 philanthropists to try and understand why they give, when they give, to whom do they wish to give to, and how do they decide how much to give. This is more of a qualitative research. I mean, it's a research that has spoken to people, and we have tried to piece together all the underlying thoughts. We have also done some secondary research in terms of numbers, so you'll find those in the report as well. So it's a mixed kind of a report, but more qualitative, trying to understand more the psyche of the giver, all of you who give generously in this room. So that's the report that we've tried to put together. And what you see in front of you is the result of that 7-8 months of work. We hope you will enjoy reading it. We hope you will get insights from the report. And we hope that it'll make you think a little bit about how you can use this report. So I'm now going to invite Abhishek Gopalka, who is from BCG, to really take us through very quickly in terms of the main or salient highlights of the report. Abhishek, over to you.
Thank you, Amitabh, and thank you, AIP, for this partnership with BCG. It's been a privilege to partner with you all. Before I get into the data, I know everyone's chomping at the bit to get into the insights. Many people have referred to it. We just wanted to zoom out and say, why exactly is philanthropy required? We've referred to it, but just to put some data on it. Many people refer to India as a tale of 2 stories, if you will. We've made tremendous impact in several areas. Whether you look at enrollment in upper primary education, maternal mortality, financial inclusion, India's made great progress in the last couple of decades. At the same time, there are areas where business as usual is not going to be enough. It is going to require what we've been talking about, which is risk capital, which is going to be a departure from the current approach, which is going to require innovation, it's going to require experiments, and it's going to require non-traditional approaches. And that's what we've heard from a lot of the philanthropists to say, that's really what we want to contribute towards, which is a new, stronger India, which really helps us to leapfrog to the next level. So finding number one, Indian UHNIs really believe that they have the potential to unlock a lot more giving. Many of you have already referred to it. 90%, more than 90% of people who we spoke with said that they intend to give a lot more. This audience itself is a great testament to that. And the question becomes, what kind of corpus would this unlock? And we just did some basic math to say, if one were to contribute, every UHNI, if they were to contribute 5% of annual incremental wealth, what kind of corpus would that unlock? The number turns out to be 75,500 crores. What does that number mean? That number happens to be 3 times the budget of the Women and Child Development Ministry at a national level, for example. And it's comparable to many other departments as well. So when we talk about, what can philanthropy and philanthropic corpus look like compared to the large budgets of government, actually they could become comparable or definitely catalytic. So let's not undermine what systemic and ubiquitous giving can actually contribute. The second finding was really something that many of you have already mentioned. Today is definitely a day where I feel like my thunder's been stolen, which is really the fact that philanthropy has to be more than just giving money. We've tried to tie it into a very simple 3-letter acronym, which is TIE, treasure, involvement, evangelization. Let me spend a quick 30 seconds on treasure. We've talked about the fact that giving is not so new in India. We've always been contributing some amounts of money. The question becomes, how can we do it systematically? And many more, philanthropists who've been approaching this much more systematically look at that number much more systematically as well. For example, what percentage of wealth, what percentage of savings do I want to contribute every year? Do I want to make a public pledge and a commitment towards that? So even treasure can be approached much more systematically, is what we heard from many philanthropists. The second is around involvement, really bringing your true self and all of it towards giving. What does that mean? That means time. That means your talent. That means ties. Talent can be of many approaches. There is the entrepreneurship talent, which is so very critical, whether it's for nonprofits, social enterprises, etc. Organization building, something which all of you in the room have been so excellent at, is exactly what the development sector requires, for example. So again, it's not just about the money, but treasure for sure, and involvement, which is so critical for these organizations to grow and create impact. And then finally, evangelization. Today is a great example of that. How do we really create a coalition of the willing and keep expanding that with every year? How does each one of us spread the message tomorrow and this weekend to 5 others and so on and so forth? So really trying to evangelize this mission and trying to build that coalition, and that really creates a domino effect. The third finding was that, we talked about the fact that this is really emotional for a lot of us. And so meaningful and sustained philanthropy is actually rooted in something deeply personal, is something that really came out from the discussions that we had. 2 simple examples. One, what triggered you to give? And the second is, what's the fundamental motivation, if you will? Many different motivations. Rohini talked about the fact that there's many different kinds of stories out there. But if you think at some patterns, sense of legacy, to say, I really want that my family should leave a legacy behind and take our family generation forward, for example. In terms of the triggers, there could have been life events which actually trigger. Abhik talked about COVID, for example, as a humanitarian crisis, which also was a trigger. So triggers and motivations, and we saw a wide range of motivations and triggers, but again, something very deeply personal and meaningful, which enables people to sustain those journeys over long periods of time and give very meaningfully. The fourth is something, again, which I think a lot of you have referred to, which is the fact that there are multiple different philanthropy archetypes. This is really an attempt at codifying them into 6 different kinds of archetypes, given their beliefs and given their contexts. Number 1 are the inspiration seekers. And there are a few of us in the room as well to say, they're on the verge of starting their philanthropic journey. How can they start giving spontaneously? The second is our emerging givers, people who've already started their philanthropic journey. They've started to experiment with a few causes, with a few organizations. They've started allocating a small part of their treasure towards philanthropy. The third is around strategic enablers. These are the folks who, in addition to the actual contributions in terms of the treasure, they actually have a lot more contribution in terms of their involvement, their ties, and really supporting the broader ecosystem towards the causes that they care about. The fourth is around cause champions. There are many of you in the room who've actually picked up a specific cause, a specific outcome, a specific area, and have really dedicated their philanthropy towards it over many decades almost. And this really helps to, corral the system and bring sustainable change in those specific areas. The fifth one is called core givers. These are people who've given substantial parts of their wealth towards philanthropy. Very often, they're actually the financial backbone, almost, if you will, of many nonprofits. They really give to multiple programs. They also give to multiple organizations. They've been giving for a long period of time. And then finally, the last category, which is rainmakers. To us, when we spoke with them, it felt like philanthropy is a fundamental part of their identity now in terms of who they are. So they would almost perhaps identify themselves as being philanthropist first and everything else a far second. Who are they? These are folks who've actually started to now embrace much more innovative forms of philanthropy, like a systemic approach. How do you partner with governments? How do you catalyze markets for good? How do you really bring in a very different approach towards giving and really spending a lot of time and effort towards that cause in terms of taking a systemic approach and creating a vision for philanthropy? The next finding is really about philanthropy becoming much, much more strategic. We've talked about the fact that it's not just about money, but what exactly do we mean when we talk about philanthropy becoming more strategic? I'll give you 2 or 3 examples. Number 1 is around institution building. All of us, when we spoke with you, we really heard the fact that you want the impact to last beyond that period of giving. And how do you do that? You do that by building institutions, by strengthening existing institutions. So that's around sustainability. Scale was a very big theme as well. Everyone's thinking about the fact that whatever we do has to be worked backwards to say, is that actually going to be scalable in the end state? And therefore, what are the pathways to scale, for example? Innovative financing came up as another one as well. So multiple different ways in which philanthropists are becoming more and more strategic in terms of how they're approaching their philanthropy. And then the last one, none of this is a cakewalk. It's not easy. Giving isn't easy is what we heard loud and clear. But what we also heard is that committed philanthropists always find a way. There are many barriers. There are structural barriers, regulatory complexities, personal challenges around time, cultural barriers. It's not yet the kind of talk of the peer group that Abhik was talking about, and hopefully today will be a step in that direction. So these are all challenges and barriers that can either prevent us from giving or giving more or giving strategically. But again, strong philanthropists said, we know these are barriers that will come our way, but we've always found a way to overcome these, and that coalition of the willing gives you ongoing inspiration to do that every day. Which brings me to my last slide. Beyond just the segments and the stories that you'll see in the report, what we've also tried to include is a toolkit, if you will. It's a practical kind of a workbook to facilitate this process of intent to impact. And it's really a set of questions for you to do 2 things. 1, reflect on your philanthropic journey so far. And second, really frame your journey for the path forward. So it's really an exercise in self-reflection and being able to chart your journey ahead. Hopefully this report will be very helpful for all of you, and thank you so much. Amitabh, over to you.
Thanks for that, Abhishek. We'll just wrap up the core findings We have done this report with a lot of time, effort, and enthusiasm. We hope it will aid you and your philanthropy. And there is a larger version of the workbook at the end of the report. Please do ping us. We'll be more than happy to share it with you and to take you through it. If we just end this by saying that I think the report really calls for greater giving, which is really stepping it up. It talks about scaling it up, which means getting greater leverage from your giving. How can you get a bigger bang for your buck? And really the third piece is all about showing up, like all of you have done today, in support of philanthropy, talking about it, and encouraging others to indulge in their own philanthropy and to really start their journeys. So thank you very, very much for being here today. We'll now segue into the really more interesting pieces of the evening by way of very interesting conversations that we have lined up. Aditi, over to you.
Thank you, Abhishek and Amitabh. Without much ado, let's move on to the next segment of hearing from our philanthropists. Our first fireside chat this evening is on navigating philanthropy, which would feature insights from our distinguished philanthropists who have significantly impacted their chosen causes. Inviting on stage Mr. Amit Chandra, chairperson and founding partner, Bain India, founder of A.T. Chandra Foundation, and of course, core founder at AIP. A strong advocate of capacity building and supporting and strengthening the ecosystem, it's an honor for us at AIP to have constant guidance from Amit. Amit, please join us here. Joining Amit is Ms. Anu Aga, former chairperson, Thermax Limited. Over the last 2 decades, Anu has been supporting various social causes with a focus on education and human rights. I've had the privilege of seeing her dedication and commitment to these organizations, and she's surely a role model for many. We also have with us Mr. Ajit Isaac, founder of Quest. A philanthropist at heart, Ajit has supported various causes on education, health, livelihoods, and particularly research for health. Please join us, Ajit. Inviting Ms. Vita Dani, co-founder of the Dani Foundation and co-promoter of ELMS Sports Foundation. Vita is very passionate about giving back to society and has impacted various causes such as sports and many others. Please join us, Vita. We'd also like to invite our co-host, Mr. Ramdeo Agrawal, founder of Motilal Oswal Financial Services.
Thank you, Aditi. It's really a privilege to be on stage with such a distinguished set of panelists. And, it's going to be a tough act to follow with Ajay and Rohini's stirring speeches. We're going to try to make this as lively as possible, as interactive as possible, leave potentially 5 or 10 minutes for audience questions as well. But first of all, let me start by thanking all of you for being on this panel. And Anu, if I might start my first question with you. I've had the privilege of working with you in my social sector journey. In fact, my first board was with you as board chair. And the one thing that I've seen you do really well amongst many other things is build great alignment, not just amongst, board members, but also within the family. You handed over your first board chair to me, and then I handed over to your daughter. But you've built great alignment within your family on philanthropy, on values, on giving. How important do you think that is to build philanthropy as a concept within a family? How does that influence giving as a culture? And can you just share with us how you were able to do that?
Thank you. Let me tell you about how we started the philanthropy journey. My late son was very keen that substantial part of our earnings should go towards philanthropy. And after he passed away, I was looking for a credible NGO, and I met Shaheen, and that's how our journey started. So having met Shaheen, my daughter Mer and I were passionate about education for the underprivileged. But when you're passionate about something, sometimes you keep talking about it till your family gets fed up. And my grandchildren, who are in their 20s. My grandson, Zahan, one day told me, Annu, tell me what you want us to give after you die, but don't keep talking about it all the time. So we realized it was not motivating them, but it was creating almost a barrier to give. They felt tired. So one advice is, don't do that with your family. At dinner time, we talk about the NGOs we were passionate about. So my son-in-law Feroz suggested that instead of just talking, why don't you seriously meet the children and talk to them about the philosophy of giving, why you are giving, to whom you are giving. And we did that, and it had a great impact on them. Then we hired a lovely lady called Anaga for our philanthropy journey. And with her, we meet 4 times a year, the entire family, for about 3 hours. And she takes us through different sectors, sometimes about health, different ones. Then sometimes she invites an NGO with whom we interact. We've helped that NGO and we get to know more about it. And it ends with interesting puzzles in the social sector. So it's fun. So I think now we are all aligned to give. But give where? Everyone is not passionate about education. My son-in-law wants to give into the health sector. And we have to realize that just because we started it and it's mostly, we call our money, we don't have a right to dictate if we want a family to go along. My granddaughter is passionate about the animals. And in the beginning, I was horrified that, you mean our money should go to dogs rather than children? But I had to learn that we have to respect all of them. So what my granddaughter does is that in a small way, in the factory, we have many stray dogs. So she looks after them. She's got many of our employees also interested in that. One thing we have decided as a family, that as long as you don't give a lot of your time and effort, we'll give small amounts. But to get big amounts, they have to be involved very passionately for some sustained time.
Excellent. You know, Anu, in your answer, there are so many nuggets of wisdom, and I think we could probably draw out a nice case study, a full article, you know, just building out on so many things that you've said. So thank you so much for sharing that with us. You know, friends, we used to, many of us used to talk about the value of data in the social sector, and the most important point being that till about 5-10 years ago, there was virtually complete lack of data. And I know one of the prior speakers spoke about the great Indian tradition of being very generous, which someone like me who looked at data believed that we are amongst the most miserly people in the world, even relative to poorer countries in and around us. That's what the data tells you, by the way. But the one thing that I've really liked about more data and transparency coming into the social sector, and especially with lists like Hurun coming in, which Vidya has been a great partner of, is that it started throwing up wonderful surprises, you know, put a spotlight on people who we knew were wonderful in the corporate world, but have been the great givers. And one of them is with us, Ajit Isaac, who is, you know, shot right up to the top of the Hurun list as one of the most generous Indians. I applaud you, Ajit, and Sarah for that. So I want to ask you, Ajit, that we have many billionaires in the country, and I've had the good privilege, having worked with my guru Hemendra on making, you know, taking many of them public. And I know how much they give. What makes you so distinctive? Why do Sarah and you give so generously relative to many of them?
Thank you, Amit. So as a background, About 17 years ago, I founded a company, Quest Corp, and today we employ about 570,000 people in India. In this company, through the mass of people that we have, we get to see a number of the structural shifts that's happening in India, from rural to urban environments, from the informal to the formal sector, from the unorganized to the organized sector. And we get to see a lot of the issues that people face just because of the volume of people that we interact with. It could be issues with indebtedness, health, education for children, migrant workers, etc. So one of the first problems that we saw and we wanted to address was how do we educate migrant children? We started helping with schools in and around Bangalore. So we took about 75 schools and about now 15,000 children whose education we support. So if the children are taken care of, migrant workers don't go back to their rural centers, they still stay back to work in urban centers. Then there were occasional projects that came, and Sarah and myself will support them without a structure. And over time, COVID happened. When COVID happened, much like the rest of the world, the response in India to COVID was a bit muddled sometimes because we're not trained to react to epidemic situations. And that was when IISc was talking about setting up a Center for Public Health to research about issues of public health. So they have core sciences, they have engineering, they have big data, and finally they have clinical inputs from a hospital that they're setting up. So we decided to support them in this center, and that center hopefully will research on issues of science, on issues of healthcare, and on policy matters. And progressively we looked at other projects too, and then it occurred to us that we need some design thinking around this. It's not something that you can take on an anecdotal basis and work on. So we had to identify areas that we thought we should work on. We identified healthcare and the area of opportunities, particularly related to education. In the area of opportunities, we looked at issues like the criminal justice system. There's 500,000 people in jails today, many of them who are convicts and not without adequate access to legal recourse. So how can we support them? There are children who are unable to go to playgrounds and play because of many factors. So they are unable to access sport and physical exercise. So we supported the writing of India's first physical activity report. And progressively, one thing led to another, and we had a foundation. And then after that, we decided that we don't want to be actively involved with any of the projects, but we'll support partner organizations. We keep a small core, and we identify partners. So we worked with CMC Vellore to set up a pediatric center. And that pediatric hospital will now have about 350 beds. The largest investor in our company is an insurance company called Fairfax from Canada. We got them interested in it. They are funding a large part of it, and the Sick Kids Hospital in Toronto is coming in as a partner as well. So we found that when you trigger something and when you work on projects, one thing leads to another, and the size builds. And that's how we got to where we are, and happy to keep moving along.
Incredible. Thank you so much. Since our host should have the privilege of going last, Ramdev, I'm going to turn to Vita with your permission. Is that okay? Okay, terrific. Thank you. Vita, I know that like my wife Archana, you have chosen to serve a deeply underserved area. When many people, I'm sure, ask you, why are you doing work in sports? In a country where so many people are suffering from hunger, so many people are, needing surgeries. There's so many other causes to serve which they think are first-order causes. You've chosen to work on sports. I'm saying that as someone who has also contributed to sports in some way. Help us understand, why does a philanthropist choose an underserved area? What went through your mind when you made that choice?
Many people in this room support education, healthcare. But Jalaj and I both believe that unless and until there is an amalgamation with sports, all these things are not going to be complete. It's in the basic center or core of the other aspects. We have all witnessed about 2 weeks ago what happened on Marine Drive. And people play sports for pride. People play sports for good health. It's quite sad to say that we are the diabetic capital of the world. And if you look at the other countries, people spend a lot of time on personal health care. And that's exactly what we need to do as a country. When you look at the survey, it is really shameful. And we as a country aspire that we will have, host 2036 Olympics. But it's not only about creating infrastructure, it's also about winning medals. When we look at our numbers as compared to others, where are we really going? And therefore, I feel sports is the most critical piece in the whole pyramid. If you look at interiors of India, I don't think children play enough. So we have taken up this cause of right to play 1 hour for all the children. And for this, we have also tied up with Piramal Foundation, and we have been able to work with almost 2,500 schools around the world, around the country in 9 states. And it's important for children to play. All of us grew up playing physical sports. But what happens today? We are all on our little gadgets, and I don't think that's going to help us anywhere. So I think sports plays a very pivotal role over here, and we should all be, running around doing things. We have events like marathon in spurts, but instead of just going out for dinners and movies, I think we should get up and really invest in our own health.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Thanks for saying that. Ramdev, you and Motilal have always been influencers in the stock market. People who I know lakhs of folks look up to you. And you did something pretty remarkable in the last year or so. Something which, going back over a century, Jamshedji Tata did, going back in the last decade or so, Yasmin and Azim did, which is, decide to give away a reasonable amount of stock and in a finite period of time. And in your case, that number is non-trivial. It's, I understand, about 2,000 crores each over a 10-year period, 5% of each of your holdings. What made you suddenly wake up one day and think about doing this? And why 5%? Why not more? Why not less? How did you arrive? I know everything you do. I read your reports. There's always some math and some logic to it. So how did you guys come up with that number?
As far as the magic of the number is concerned, it started with Moti. He said he was very keen. He was mulling over for 1 year or so that, Ramdev, why don't we set aside 10-15% of our holding for philanthropic purposes? And I said, boss, koi idea hai nahi apne paas. Why the hell bother? Whenever idea comes, we'll do it. That was a simple answer I used to give. And then one evening he called me up. He said, I'm doing it tomorrow. You want to do it? I said, I can't be left alone. So I said, let's do it together. We did that, and then we'll see what happens later. Because it's only a commitment. We have not done anything in the sense that we have just pledged. At least in my mind, it is clear that if we are not able to spend in 10 years, we'll give it to Pradhan Mantri Relief Yojana or somewhere. But we are definitely going to exhaust that money. So I think one thing I learned about giving, everything I learned from Warren Buffett as far as the stock market is concerned. So I was looking for another Buffett for giving. And I met you in Nirmal's marriage. In the evening, I pulled him aside and said, what is your inspiration for giving? And he gave me the name of Chuck Finney. And Chuck Finney, then I looked at YouTube and all, and then finally I found his book, A Billionaire Who Wasn't. And read the book. I was so inspired. I said, now I got my guru for giving. And then I read this book, Gospel of Wealth by Andrew Carnegie. I think Chuck Finney was inspired by Carnegie's book. So I think it's such a wonderful thought that to give back. In any case, we had actually started giving before that only. In 2008, the hostel where we met, myself and Moti, and they wanted to build up a new wing altogether, 500, 700 rooms, seated hostel. So we said, this is our biggest privilege to start giving by contributing to the new building. And that's how we started. That time CSR was not there. CSR came in 2014. So since then, and we saw the result of that. It is such a wonderful feeling when I go there. And then we decided to kept on looking for opportunity, and here we gave the pledge. And now the biggest trouble is, how do you actually spend it? You know, making money is probably easier.
Don't worry, that will solve for you. You don't have to worry. It's an amazing story. I think we'll solve that problem for you. Many of us have figured out ways how to give, and we're going to send you to Bangalore to spend time with Yasmin and Azim, so the 5% becomes 10% each.
Sure.
But thank you so much for what you have done. It is truly an inspirational story. In the stock market, I know many people, by the way, who are already thinking about what you have done and are thinking hard about following you. So thank you so much for what you have done.
One thing that actually spending in 10 years, that is my idea to tell Moti. I mean, pledging is one, but because this country needs so much to be done, so much in any field you take up, sports, health, education. I think the time to do it is now. The moment we become Viksit Bharat, then probably our money is not needed. So I think this is a great time to spend whatever one pledges.
Excellent. Aditi, how are we doing on time? Do we have time for a few audience questions? Or we can take a couple. So we have time for one or two audience questions. If anybody has any questions, we'd be happy to take them. Just introduce yourself. And yeah, Anisha has a question right there. If you can get a mic to her, please.
Thank you so much for taking your time out and sort of running through how you all think of philanthropy and the purpose. I have a question similar to what Anuji was saying. How do you, when you're trying to do this with your family who have sort of different ideas or different passions that they feel strongly for, how do you sort of come together and decide? Is it something that you'll do? Maybe you say, okay, we'll focus on this passion for 5 years and the next one for 5. Do you have a timeline or a tenure to it? Or how do you all decide what is the priority of the passion area?
Anu, the question is, how do you decide priorities within the family? Would you like to take that?
I'm not sure if there is one method of deciding. You can say, I've given the money, I decide. But I don't think that will bring the family together. You can say that, let's decide that what is it that we'll give majority to, most of our funds. And then, what can we give to others also? Because if you want to take people along, you have to listen to what they want. And just, Vita, I want to say that it could be sports, art, music. Our affluent children are exposed to all of these. Why shouldn't the poor? So, if your passion is one of those, please go ahead. I think so.
One last question. Anyone else wants to go?
So, Amit, I have a question for you.
Oh, yeah, sure.
You've yourself pushed the boundaries of giving in your personal experience. What were the sort of pillars that drove your change, and you moved from becoming sort of grant maker to a driver of systemic change? How did you do it?
Yeah, thanks, Ajit. I think for us, for Archana and me, I think the first pillar the boundary that we really had to push was how much to give. We were fortunate we started giving very early, which was in our first month of our marriage. And I think the first boundary we really pushed was moving out of what people used to say, give 10% of your income, to decide to give away most of our income, when we were in our 30s. And I think the inspiration for that was really Chuck Feeney's book. And it was completely by chance that I came across that because a friend of mine, Abhay Havaldar, who used to run General Atlantic, the company that Chuck Feeney founded, one day just sent that book to me by chance and said, "You'll enjoy reading this book." And I read that book and it just blew my mind that someone who had built $8 billion of wealth in his lifetime decided to give away all his wealth in his lifetime and make such extraordinary impact, but do it all anonymously, because of which many people had not heard about it till the book actually came out. But I think what I was really fortunate is that Archana and me were on the same page, and we figured that if someone could do that, it didn't matter that our scale of wealth was a small fraction of that, but why could we not do it? So we decided to ask ourselves the important question, what is enough? And then decide to give away most of it to things that we were passionate about: rural development, capacity building, intellectual disability in her case. And so that made life really interesting because we were able to then build a foundation which focuses on all of that and work with very interesting people who were able to do that. The second big pillar was, for us, return on investment, because I come from private equity world, has always been a big driver. And so given we had limited capital, it wasn't, I'm not as smart as Ramdev and Moti, and I didn't start a company where we created a lot of wealth. It was all coming out of income. We really had to focus hard on making sure every buck went as far as possible. And so we really looked for multipliers. And for us, the multipliers came from building collaborations, both with other players in the ecosystem and particularly with the government. And so we looked very carefully at how we could move systems with the limited capital that we had. And the first 10, 15 years of my journey, when I worked with Anu and all, we were really focused on working within limited systems, which is, philanthropy working just with, a school or a few schools or 10 or 20 schools. And I realized that there were limitations of that unless you really worked with transforming the government or supporting transformation with the government, you hadn't really made a difference. I got that insight mainly from my friend Ajay P. Ramal, who spoke earlier on, because it was he and his CEO, Aditya Natraj, who got me to understand that theory of change. And that was really interesting, because now everything we do is either helping the government transform or building platforms that help philanthropy as a whole. And you may fail spectacularly when you do that, but when you succeed, the ROI is very, very high. And so I think that's been the two big shifts, but it's come out of a lot of scars. Great. I think let me wrap the session up by thanking all of you. I've learned a lot from each one of you. I've worked with some of you over the last 20, 25 years and learned a lot. But thank you so much for your wisdom and for all the wonderful work that you do. Thanks.
Thank you, esteemed panelists, for a very insightful discussion. As we shared earlier today, the report emphasizes a lot on the need for strategic and systemic giving. As Ashish mentioned earlier, the Convergence Foundation recently released a report on 20 exemplar organizations that are following the systemic approach. I'd now like to invite Bikrama Daulat Singh to share insights in this report.
This report really highlights that there's a new cadre of Indian unicorns that have emerged in India that have created population-level impact. And we call them, these organizations, system support organizations. And they've really done this through supporting landmark policies, creating model programs, and creating catalytic public goods. And the report captures detailed examples of what they did, but just to call out a few, Vidhi assisted the government in the drafting of the bankruptcy law and the Aadhaar Act.
Surge created a model which reduced infant mortality in Maharashtra from 121 to 30. We heard what Piramal Foundation has achieved. Pratham created the Asar model, which sparked the focus on the learning crisis in India. So like this, a lot of these organizations have really created population-level impact. We really tried to analyze what was so unique about these organizations. And, like this video highlighted, they did these 4 things. They went upstream to address the root cause of issues. For example, Central Square Foundation identified reading as by age 10 as the source of the learning crisis. Secondly, all these organizations were super ambitious. They wanted to create population-level impact. For example, Ek Steps created a Diksha platform that at the outset wanted to reach 200 million children. Thirdly, a lot of these organizations thought of sustainability largely through working with the government. And Childline, for example, work with the government to introduce a helpline that's available in every city in India today, run by the government. And finally, which is very critical, a lot of these organizations looked at increasing the effectiveness of government spend. Where do they get leverage? And organizations like Janagra worked on the JNURM mission, which has a budget of 1.2 lakh crores. Central Square Foundation worked with the Ministry of Education, and there was a budget created around foundational learning through a Nipun Bharat scheme of 13,000 crores. We actually then engage with these 20 organizations to unpack what did they actually do. And I'll request Raghu to very briefly just talk about what we found in terms of the how of system change.
Thanks, Bikrama. So as we looked at the journeys of these 20 organizations, I think Bikrama briefly touched upon it. I think the 3 broad approaches we saw: the program-led approach, the policy-led approach, and the public goods-led approach. But just to get into a little more detail around the how, what we found in common across these 20 exemplars were these 8 characteristics. By and large, we found that most of these organizations which have gone through the journey of creating large-scale systems change, we found a mix of these 8 practices, as we are calling them. So research, for example, was something that we found most of these exemplars had invested in very early. So a strong data foundation, research, and insight generation. Partnerships and collaborations was again a big focus area. All of them looked at scaling, looked at partnerships with a range of players across, as Rohini earlier said, range of players across Samaj, Sarkar, and Bazaar to create scale. And all of them have invested heavily in creating institutional capacity with the government. They worked with public systems to create and strengthen that capacity. So that was really in terms of what they were doing externally. And as we also tried to understand how is it that they've built their own organizations. So what we found is whether it's around the way they've invested in leadership, the way they looked at philanthropic capital, the way they've looked at leveraging systems insiders to accelerate their journeys, or looking at talent pools, or building a culture of iteration. So these are some of the things that we found common across these exemplars. And if you look at the study itself, I think lots of interesting nuggets around how each of these capabilities has been built, and that's essentially what we've synthesized in the report.
Thank you, Raghu. We believe that, for India to solve its systemic issues, we need the next 100 impact unicorns. And private philanthropic capital, HNI, CSR capital, which is growing, is going to play a very critical role. And we found while engaging with these organizations that the private capital provides these organizations with the ability to iterate, take risks, seek big goals, and also provides them the ability to invest in institutional building. So we've shared a copy of this report with all of you in your bag, and we look forward to working with you to building the next 100 impact unicorns of India. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Raghu and Vikrama. Our next fireside discussion is on unlocking funding for systemic impact. I'd like to invite on stage Ashish Dhawan to lead the conversation. Joining him are Ms. Rukmani Banerjee, CEO Pratham. As we've discussed earlier, over the years, Pratham has set a great example of designing and demonstrating scalable solutions which are backed by data, evidence, and research. Rukmani, please join us. And Mr. Rizwan Koita, founder of the Koita Foundation. Rizwan is also the chairperson of the NABH. Amongst other initiatives, the Koita Foundation is working on multiple projects at national level to promote adoption of digital health in India. Unfortunately, Hari Menon had to catch a flight, so he wouldn't be joining this panel now. Over to you, Ashish.
So I think as we did this study, we found that these 20 exemplars really delivered outsized impact because they worked at population scale, their work was truly sustainable, and they were addressing root cause of the issue. I can't think of anyone better than Rukmini, who has led an organization like Pratham, which has been around for 2.5, coming up to 3 decades now. And they've done a lot of programmatic work, but there's been a lot in terms of the studies that were done, RCTs, teaching at the right level really got spread into Africa, many other countries. Asar, as was pointed out, got adopted across Africa and South Asia. So Rukmini, can you talk a little bit about, how this system change happened within Pratham? And how did you manage to get donors? Because most of your donors, I assume, wanted to fund your programmatic work, to think that this was important.
Thank you, Ashish. It's a challenge to keep people listening to us while better things may be out there at the back. Between the report that Bikrama and Raghu talked about, as well as listening to all of you, I've picked up some vocabulary while I've been here. And so patient and flexible capital is clearly, I didn't know that is what helped us, but now I do from seeing the charts up here. So I would say that if I look at Asar, for example, Asar did not start out as a big study. It started out actually as village report cards in trying to figure out what is it about learning or schooling that is really not up to the mark, and getting local people to participate. And so we knew that that kind of an effort, and again, I've learned here that I think that in addition to some funding, it was really the time that people gave, that local people gave, in engaging with some process of trying to figure out what the problem was, that helped us to grow our knowledge and our ability to design something bigger. So just in a nutshell, I would say that we used whatever opportunity was available to us. These were early years, 2004-05. There wasn't much CSR in those days. But we were very fortunate, I think, in many ways. Mr. Vaghul, who many of you know, I think really opened the door for how corporates should start thinking about some of these things. And Mr. Piramal was very close along with him. And I think they began to really put out that there are many big things to change systems that are required. And accompanied by that, we have been greatly supported over many years by the Indian diaspora. And there as well, people give small amounts, medium amounts, not always very large amounts. But a lot of this was unrestricted, which people put faith in us to say, we know how you will spend it well. So a lot of, I think, our core work that has developed from that time had the backing of very influential people, the time and the talent of young people at the local level, and support and trust of Indian diaspora. I would say that perhaps is the combination that enabled us to develop some of these things, and evolve them.
Thanks, Rukmini. Rizwan, you built a leading IT company serving the healthcare industry globally. And then with your philanthropy, I know you started out by focusing on NGOs and helping them with technology. But now your big focus really is on digital health. And you've been building these centers and institutional capability, but also been working closely with government on driving change. So could you talk a little bit about your thinking around this systemic approach to philanthropy?
So first of all, thanks everyone for Thursday, late Thursday evening. Rekha and I conceived our foundation about 8 years back, and we've been doing a lot of work in the NGO space, really working with technology, using technology to help not-for-profit organizations scale. About 2.5 years back, I was running a company and zipping back and forth from US to India for 25 years. And at some point, I said, let me sort of change gears into a slightly different mode, and I stepped down. So now I run along with Rekha. I'm 100% involved in the foundation. So it's I think a little bit different than just making. I think the bigger contribution that at least I feel that is the time that I'm able to spend, and I often feel that I'm lucky that I have the luxury of being able to spend time. So when I started working in the foundation, I had a choice of either working with not-for-profits or working with the government. And honestly, from my perspective, one, the scale of the government, and I think we've spoken about this enough through the evening, is like really, really large. And the second thing that excites me is that, fundamentally I look at myself as a problem solver, and the sort of innate thinking is it's very difficult to work with the government. So I said, chalo, we'll try that out also and see what happens. And I've been at this compared to everybody else on stage. I think I'm a newbie at this. I've been at this full time for 2.5 years. And it's been a remarkably positive experience working with the government. And what we try and do is basically work with multiple departments of the government. It could be like the IIT Bombay is an arm of the government which does education, or it could be Tata Memorial Hospital, which is basically a government of India entity doing cancer patients. It could be the National Health Authority, which runs the Health ID program across the country. There's an institute called, or the organization called the National Health Accreditation Board for Hospitals, NABH, that does accreditation. What we're really trying to do is to fortify these organizations into participating in the digital health transformation. And it may sound complicated, but essentially, if you look at everything, a lot of things that have happened in India over the last 20 years, you look at financial services, you look at travel, you look at manufacturing, the role of technology cannot be undermined. In fact, some would argue that that's had the biggest impact. What my foundation and what I'm trying to do is to see, okay, what does it take to infuse digital technologies in the business of healthcare, and how do we promote or how do we support government organizations to be able to do that better? And the angle that we're doing is we're actually helping support the government in creating internal teams to be able to do this. So, often what happens with the government is these outside not-for-profit organization, they come and run a few programs. 2, 3, 4, 5 years may go by, the program gets over, some department level changes happen and the program may die. We're trying to see if we can institutionalize a capability where we are actually creating teams within the government organization to be able to support this transformation. So that's sort of, I think, it's a new experiment of, intellectual experiment of sorts that we're trying. And it's been 2.5 years, and many of these initiatives are actually doing quite well. Yeah.
Thanks, Rizwan. I just have one more quick question each, and then we'll ask a couple of questions from the audience. So Rukmini, Asar has been a seminal report because it comes out, and honestly, my own idea of the FLN or the early years being critical came from the Asar report. So it influenced a lot of my own views on education. But you actually impacted the global space. I mean, even Pakistan started doing Asar and many other countries. How did that happen, that this, what you started as a community exercise in India, spread globally? I know some of it was just organic, but how did you plan for it? And the same thing with TARL. It spread so widely. So what was the secret sauce there?
So I think the two are slightly different. Asar, as you know, we did it for ourselves and we did it at a large scale, but people got to know of it. And I think there was at least the role of one major foundation who was a multi-year funder of the work that we did, the Hewlett Foundation. And they could see that whatever we were doing could potentially be of use to other people. Now, we don't know what dunya mein kya chal raha hai, hame kya pata, hum to India mein hai. But they were able to bring people from Africa to come and see things here. And all we did was to just share, what we've done, we made it a point to share our mistakes so that anybody taking it away would make new mistakes and not the old mistakes that we have made. And that's how it really went. People came from East Africa. Pakistan in those days was easier because you could walk and come and see, and we are very much like them, at least in our own rural areas. And that's how the Asar work spread. People also named their exercise, like we called it Asar. Pakistan called it Asar as well because it means something in their language. East Africans called it Uwezo. So it was important that you take something and you give it, if it's your child, you give it, your name, the name that you want your child to have. And I think that if you look at those methods, they were also contextualized based on, whatever was the current conditions. For example, we use a 5th household rule in the village. So you go to every 5th household. The Kenyans said that if we do this, we'll be walking for days because sometimes their 5th household is like 20 kilometers away. So people adapted and people took what they thought was useful. And to us, it was a mystery how something that we had done for ourselves could be so useful to other people. The teaching at the right level was actually a bit different because in the evolution of teaching at the right level, JPAL had played a major role in evaluating. There were in a period of about 10 years, we had, I think, 5 or 6 randomized control trials that they had done. They have a presence in many parts of the world. And when anybody, policymakers, governments, academics, asked them about education interventions that dealt with the learning crisis, what would they recommend? On the basis of the evidence, they recommended teaching at the right level. And so I think that the spread of teaching at the right level, I would give a lot of credit to JPAL because they are the ones who were able to seed these ideas in whoever's head. And then, of course, there was more international capital that followed. But both of these were sort of make in India, use in India, enjoy in India kinds of things. And I guess that we are developing things which are useful in many other parts of the global south.
No, thank you, Rukmini. Madhav and you, I know, pioneered this. You don't talk as much about it. But really, when I've traveled in Africa, people know about Pratham and the work that you did and how it inspired work in other countries. And now digital public goods, thanks to work. But there's so much opportunity for innovation we do here to go elsewhere. Rizwan, one last question for you. You could have chosen to be much more programmatic in healthcare, but you chose the approach you took. You mentioned working with government, even putting in teams in there, getting to work with some of the institutions and shaping them. You also went to your alma mater, IIT Bombay, and set up a center there. And I know it was hard work to embed it in there. And then you went to other institutions like Ashoka to do the same. So why was that so important to your systemic work in digital health?
I think that's an interesting question. If you just go back 20 years in India and ask a simple question, who drove innovation in India? And what you will find is that almost across all sectors, the folks that drove innovation in India were not the large multinational companies, or in fact, for that matter, even the large corporates. A lot of the innovation in different sectors in India have actually come about when kids or students or young professionals in their early 20s and mid 20s went out and did startups. Yeah. And you see a proliferation of that across all sectors, right? So, today, of course, Flipkart has become large in e-commerce, and there are 20 other, the Mintras and others. They're all startups from, some engineering college or some IIT or whatever. If you look at financial services, then you've got a whole bunch of, companies, very small companies started by young entrepreneurs who then scaled. If you look across all the ecosystem, you'll find that that's the systemic thing that happened. Unfortunately, that doesn't happen in healthcare as much in technology as we would like. And the principal reason it doesn't happen in healthcare is because, of a very skewed academic system we have in India. That if you're a bright kid in India and your parents, and many of us are of that genre, want us to become either a doctor or an engineer, when we are young. And the interesting thing about India is that if you want to become a doctor, then you have to focus on something called PCB, and you drop maths. And if you want to become an engineer, then you focus on PCM and you drop biology. So some of the best engineers in the country, right, on the best technology guys have never studied biology after 10th standard. And if they remember what they studied up till 10th standard. And the best doctors in India have no idea of mathematics because they dropped it at the end of 10th standard, in some ways. Yeah. Now that is interestingly very different from what happens in the Western world. Yeah. So you could be a computer science graduate from Stanford and then you may want to do pre-med and you can become a doctor. So now you're a doctor but you have an undergraduate degree in computer science, And that is not an uncommon thing to happen in the West, but it never happens in India. So what we realize that if you want to drive innovation in digital health, then you have to almost seed a core type of individual who understands technology and who understands medicine. Yeah. And our initial bias, and some of the doctors may not like this, right? I think it's easier to teach an engineer a little bit of medicine than to take a doctor and teach AI and analytics and math right from, because that's a much more difficult skill to teach. That's what I think, but we will experiment that as well at some point, So what we have tried to do is we've spawned two centers of digital health, one at IIT Bombay and one at Ashoka University. And the intent there is to create this gene pool of talent where you've got like really bright engineers or people with math and expertise, and we are teaching them, we are helping create partnership with hospitals, we are creating partnership with healthcare organizations, others, to be able to create opportunities for creating this cadre of professionals which is completely absent in India, and it won't naturally happen unless there are efforts like this. Yeah. So that's sort of the long answer to your question, Ashish. Yeah.
No, thank you. Rizwan and Rukmini, both of you are very inspiring. I have learned so much from both of you.
Thank you, Rukmini, Rizwan, and Ashish. I'd now like to invite our co-host, Mr. Motilal Oswal, who's also the founder of the Motilal Oswal Group. I've again had the privilege of witnessing the strong commitment across two generations of the Oswal and Agarwal family towards putting their recent pledge into action. Motilal ji, please come and share your thoughts. Thank you.
Today, at least I had very interesting session and a lot of learnings as a new student to philanthropy. There are a lot of insights and learnings for me, and I'm sure all of you must have got a lot of ideas. We had two interesting speakers, Ajay Pilamal and Rohini ji. We had two interesting panels of some of the best philanthropists, and also we have two fantastic research reports coming in from about philanthropies, and all these, of course, are having so many lessons to be learned and to be practiced that ultimately there's a huge difference between knowing and doing. The time is there for us to do something about what we know, and we all know that when we invest the money into the market, there are good returns, but there are finite returns. But if we invest our money into philanthropy, I think there can be infinite returns. With that thoughts, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Motilal ji. And with this, I'd like to thank our hosts, Mr. Ramdev Agrawal and Mr. Motilal Oswal, and of course, all of you in the audience for joining us today for this inspiring session and conversations on philanthropy. Let's continue these conversations over cocktails and dinner. Please join us. And last but not the least, a big thank you to the people behind this report and behind this event, the Motilal Oswal Group, BCG, and the AIP team who worked relentlessly behind the scenes. Thank you.